on a statement regarding inclusive playgrounds. Kingsley, could you present this from the playground committee? Is that
Correct, yeah. So I gave you the kind of last iteration from our playground committee. Since then, I presented you with another iteration. This just really tries to do a better job as far as putting the statements together. This has not gone to our committee, so I'm just giving this to you tonight to look over and have. I would recommend that before it goes forward on the agenda for next time, I have the opportunity to send it out to committee members, get their confirmation first, and then I'll upload it to Word Docs for the next agenda. But basically, it's a statement that was requested from you just to show your support of inclusive playground environment for all kids. And so it speaks to some of the statements that we've given previously, and ultimately, again, it's just it's to really ensure that people know that the board supports this work and that is directly in that particular action.
comments from board members or questions? I mean, for me, one of the things that has been frustrating in playground discussions is that we are saying we want inclusive playing. We've not described, I don't think, concretely enough what that means. So we're not providing a proper guidance to the schools and the PTOs that are going through this playground design process. And so is my only comment or piece of feedback to the playground committee for consideration would be, are there ways to make our statement more specific? This still reads fairly general to me, so very, we want to be inclusive and value inclusivity. That's very important to say those things, but the more specific we can be to provide the kind of guidance that we believe is really important to be really helpful. It's just food for thought.
And I would say to you, one of the things that we did discuss at the last meeting, because there were comments in the same way about what level of specificity, and I had actually stated to them that I wanted it to be more general. If you would like, we could wait on the inclusive statement after we've had a conversation with the expert, after we've gone through the process. That would be a better way of addressing the situation, honestly, because then we'd be able to tailor the statement more towards the recommendations that we'd be giving to the board. Instead of this, the reason why it's general is in the event that we come with
That's right.
something,
Yeah.
we don't want to have to go back.
We don't want to
and
lock
reset.
ourselves in something
Exactly.
without having universal understanding of what that inclusiveness means, especially since we know we have an expert coming into the community. I would prefer to do it that way to make sure then we're making sure we're not backing ourselves in a corner where we come out with a statement that's very specific and it still misses the mark or we can't produce on that.
I don't think that's so general that you can still do whatever. I mean, I actually like the idea of waiting for the consultant to get that input and having the committee do that, come forward with a statement that really has meat in it, and then using that to guide the playground handbook, which should become much, much more specific, right, in terms of the guidelines and the options and things like that. So.
Yeah, and so with that, I'll apologize to Andrew for saying didn't look like understand inclusion. I'm a little heated on this, but I think this gets to the point that it's not ADA, that ADA,
Right.
that it's
Yeah,
a
well-
mindset and a philosophy, and I think this will help us spell that out or have the guidance for staff to be able to say, okay, and that it's not just adding and saying it's got to cost X number of dollars, but it's also in just the way we design the same exact equipment and the way it's laid out, and then hopefully that expert will have.
I wasn't offended by it. I just wanted to make sure that there are a lot of members of the community that really don't know the difference between the two. And we need to get that message out there so we can head down the right road. I've helped write an RFQ for this expert. Actually, I held up on it until after this meeting to decide that was the right thing to do. I'll go out the door tomorrow.
No, yeah, we spent a lot of time on this, and with what Kingsley presented at the beginning, and working on that. So it's a work in progress, and then if we're given time, I think we can produce a much better statement in that way as well.
I guess I want to make the counter argument to that. I think the statement is actually not a bad statement. I mean, and I think that the idea of it is that we are embracing inclusivity not just compliance, and that's what we're after. I think the specificity comes in the handbook. I think the specificity comes from an expert, because if you ask me what are inclusive elements of a playground, I'm probably going to give you very basic things that we are already throwing in there that's not doing it, because I'm not an expert on it, right? And that's, I think we need that specificity. I don't know that it needs to be in a statement that we're saying we're embracing inclusiveness.
I just
I think that's, I don't know how you would end up having a statement of, these are all of the things we're going to do to make all of our playgrounds inclusive in a statement like that. I think that would be very awkward.
Well, it can't be too specific, but I just feel like this is, I just feel like it's so general that there's nothing, the playground committee, the.
I guess where I'm leaning towards is, can you then add a statement to it that says, this is how we're going to achieve it, by having an expert that's going to help us create a handbook? Like, that's the specificity part that you put in your statement, and not, I mean, you know what I mean? Like, if you start talking about, okay, each playground has to have this piece and this piece, like, I don't know how you get more specific without going too specific. I don't know where that middle ground lies, but maybe there is a better way to do it.
Some of the elements, when I was thinking of how to make it a little more specific, is focusing on some of the elements that's in the RFQ. So in general, talking about certain types of play equipment, but just inclusive play equipment in general. And so the level of specificity will more speak to still the general topics, but it would be kind of generally along the lines of what we're trying to prepare for the RFQ. So that's what, you're right, it wouldn't be, we are saying that these elements are the standards by which we want the district to continue forward, because that level of specificity would be inside the playground handbook, but at least some more clear guidance. Because I would say, just because of the recent community comments over the last 2 meetings, whenever the board statement does go out, people pay attention. And so we've heard comments to that end, and so I'd rather err on the side of caution than move forward. But I think your element as far as, yeah, you're right, the guidelines may be more in the handbook, but kind of having a balance in between, I think is what we're looking for.
Okay, next up, I'm sorry, yes, thank you, I got, so we've got Borla, Weber, gosh, my name's died again.
It's up on the screen here too.
So, should we start with Kirkwood? And
Sure. Can I start? We do have Principal Gerling from Kirkwood and Yaz here from Weber, and Celeste couldn't make it from Borlaug, but she had another commitment. But I want to start the discussion by telling you that Anita and I had a discussion today about the consequences, potential consequences of building the playground prematurely in terms of where the new addition might go. I think, honestly, where we're going to put it is probably okay, but I'd like to respect her wishes that we delay the Kirkwood playground until we actually start the design work. Nita's in the process of reading all the architects' RFPs, and you got all 10 of them done, Anita? No? So anyway, the next board meeting, we're going to make a recommendation on the architectural team for Kirkwood and Wood, and I think that she made a reasonable request. So we can hold up on that one particular project until we know where the new addition is going to be and how that may or may not affect the playground areas. And in the same time, it gives us the time to work through the process of inclusiveness and add some more of that to the playground as well, make it more inclusive. So I think it takes a little pressure off this discussion. We can lay that aside. If I stated anything inaccurately there? No? Okay. So in terms of Weber and Borlaug, we go out every year. We look at the equipment. We've created a playground replacement schedule based on life cycles on 25 years. That was part of the playground handbook that we put together a couple years ago. We ranked all the playgrounds. We know the ones that we have to maintain. We know where the work is, the safety issues, and so we've gone about it in that way, and these actually three kind of came to the top of the pile. There was even a fourth one, Lucas, that we knew we couldn't get done this year, so we put that off till next year. It was on this year's life cycle. So, having said that, these are two playgrounds that, and they're partial playgrounds, they're not full playgrounds, that need to be replaced. Both schools, Weber and Borlaug, have had input and have worked with Ben. I think both have had parental input. Yeah, you can speak to that, and these are the playgrounds that they came up with.
So, for, I was just going to say for Weber, it was not as intentional as Chris did with the surveys, which were amazing. Thinking moving forward, it would be really nice to be able to go that far in depth to collect more data. But we were able to talk with about 10 people all together, from teachers that volunteered to be on the committee. It was posted to all teachers and student representatives who came and were able to essentially help us with picking out the playground and understanding the needs for it. And then we also talked with our PTA and shared that this update was coming and gave them the information, and they were very excited about this process, even though they knew that they would have to pay a portion of it for the swings, which they had the funds to be able to do that. And so overall, we did get some input, and I do recognize that different buildings do it different ways, but essentially, when we were complete with that, we sent our parents an informational letter through the bulletin that highlighted all of the updates that were coming, from technology to playground, another school year, and things that were occurring. So just wanted to fill you in on that piece.
So if you like an explanation of the playground, Ben Grimm is here, and he probably would be the best person to show them to you. We do have them on, ready to show you if you'd like to look at them.
And I spoke to Celeste from Borlaug, and I think she was very happy with the process that her team had gone through in terms of working with Ben, and the group that the PTO, and parents and students, and things similar to what you're describing. And I think she was appreciative of us having this conversation tonight, given the discussion around inclusivity and the need to be very alert and intentional, but kind of along the lines of what I said at the board table tonight, that until we provide different guidelines, I think it's hard, and it's been hard for schools designing playgrounds or enhanced playgrounds to cover inclusivity. We just have not been specific about sort of the requirements and the guidelines there yet. So I think, I'm hoping I'm not speaking or over-speaking for her, but she was appreciative of the process, thought the process was good, that she is very much looking forward to having enhancements to her playground, but of course would be respectful of what the board decision would be. So that, I think, is our position.
And is Weber one of the ones of schools where we have a rubber playground right now?
We currently have one.
Yeah, we have one at Van Allen as well. Just back to the earlier discussion, there are several playgrounds that we've had experience with rubber in the district. So tile is basically what they've been, but I don't know. So it's your show. You want Ben to explain what we're doing? Or are you okay with that? No?
Before it comes forward, I just want to kind of make a recommendation based on comments. And so I would recommend, absent Kirkwood, because of the prior conversation that Joanne had with Anita, to move forward on these playgrounds. But ultimately, we're going to stay on playground activities, designs, plan until after the committee has been able to provide recommendations. I think you spoke to the board table, and ultimately, also my job, I look at things from a process standpoint. I understand the nature of inclusiveness and obviously equity, and we have these conversations, but I also don't want to pull the rug up from other people who have gone through a deliberate process and have ultimately achieved a result. That's not saying that I don't want inclusion, and again, I think there's also some references made to the DOJ report as far as what it's going to bring back, and I just want to make sure that the board knows, especially that that's going to focus on accessibility. They're not going to ask us to put in a chair or a wheelchair, a swing with the wheelchair access. This is not going to happen. We're going to focus on the details around the surfacing, the details around the specific playground equipment, and whether or not it has different levels of above level or ground level components and things along those lines that are specifically called out in the ADA. And so I I just want to make sure we're clear on that because it does make it a tough conversation when we focus, because, I mean, I was here, not too long ago when there was a lot of consternation and discussion on accessibility, but we really figured out that we were talking about inclusion. And since then, we've been able to move that conversation forward, and I think in a really good, deliberative way. But that would be my recommendation, because since folks have already gone through the process, again, taking it back away from them, I think doesn't feel good. I don't think it's the right thing to do. But I would say that then moving forward, we put a stay, and what I mean by a stay is that we put a halt on all playground designs, planning, and things along those lines until we have community recommendations. The only other piece that I would add to that is I would like to have some conversation about what that timeline is. Because if I don't want it to go into, November is, as I was talking to Dwayne or Craig, November is the time that planning starts again. And so I was going to recommend that we focus on kind of an August and September timeline when that recommendations come back. That would give us also enough opportunity to make sure we have a clear month or 2 months to prepare for implementation and planning, what that looks like. What I just call general PD guidance that we provide for principals, staff, teachers, parents. But I would say that would be my recommendation, that the guideline be, I'd say August to September, because August can be really busy, but in that time frame to make sure that we're prepared for that.
I think that's reasonable.
What's the life cycle on these playgrounds? 25 years?
I think technically it's 22 years, but we build in a little bit of flexibility in there. The main sports, I think, are typically warranted for 25, but we want a little bit of wiggle in there.
I mean, I guess my issue is we built 2 non-inclusive playgrounds, and that's what's there for 2 more decades. And I do appreciate the process people went through and the lack of guidance there, but then we lose that opportunity at those schools for truly all kids to be included in play. And I think, that's what IDEA is, and that's what ADA is. It's like there's this percentage of the population that is so excluded from just normal things that the rest of us get to do that we have to have laws that say we're going to, and inclusion, I understand, goes beyond that, which I guess that's what I'm looking for the district to be. If we can have a state-of-the-art weight room and football fields and basketball courts, and that is great. We can have state-of-the-art playgrounds that have inclusion in mind. And so that's why I hesitate, Longfellow passed, and they do need a playground. There was the choice of maybe no playground, and that's not the case at Borlaug or Weber. They have playgrounds. And to put it out another year, to make sure that then for the next 2 decades, we've got something that's inclusive.
Yeah, and just to restate it, these are partial playgrounds that go to schools, and Ben, is there safety issues associated with those 2 playgrounds?
Yeah, there would be things we'd have to address if we wanted to delay.
I mean, that's why they're at the top of the list, because it's not only age, but there's potential safety issues associated with those 2 as well. So just so everything's on the table.
And 2 things in relation to that, because I appreciate that statement and comment. That was going to be my next question if there was concerns, because ultimately the question is it safe? And if it's not safe, then we're required and we have notice to make sure that we're compelled to make sure it's safe for kids. And it'd be awkward and we'd be liable if we're stating in this meeting that it's not safe, and then we continue to use the playground to that extent. And so that's where there was some excited concern when I received the email from Craig and Steve regarding potential halt from the playground standpoint. The other piece of this that I always focus on, and this is in some sense legally, is the precedent we're setting as far as the process is concerned. And so in general, we're just thinking about we have a rate for our students. We're talking about academic achievement. We're talking about disproportionality is significantly low and highly disproportionate. I would love for us to wait and stop all teaching that could be problematic and hurt our kids in any particular way. But we can't. We ultimately have to build processes and put things in place in order to make it work, and being respectful of processes that have happened beforehand to make sure that goes forward. I mean, again, we're not going to argue about inclusion, because I totally believe we should be inclusive as possible and do that to that regard. But I just don't want us to move forward in a way that, 1, is unsafe and puts us in some serious liability, but then 2, sets up a precedent that could be problematic as well. But I mean, ultimately, it's your decision. I'm just here to guide you and direct you on the limits and the ramifications of whatever your actions be.
You know, when you talked about setting precedents, just out of curiosity, do we know any neighboring areas, districts that do have that facility? Have we looked into that?
I mean, we have one at the Children's Hospital.
Actually, Clear Creek Command is trying to develop one too in North Liberty. They're working on one. It's not totally inclusive, but they're working on it. And I would like to add one really positive statement. Most of us were at a groundbreaking tonight for Grant Elementary. What a great opportunity it's going to be to design a truly inclusive playground up there. It takes additional funds, but honestly, unless we run into some really, really severe soil issues up there that create some overages, I honestly believe that there'll be some additional funds that we could use to do it right, to do a good playground at Grant. It would be a really great place to start to show the community how to do it.
I think you ought to answer your question. I think the difference in general is the scale. So why I think we're going through this process of going to a district committee is that most of the examples that we talk about or see in the news have been like one playground or one playground, one community, one playground, another community. We're talking about ensuring some type of level of inclusion across our entire district. And that's where, again, I see it differently. I mean, yeah, we could focus on one particular playground, and I'm not saying we shouldn't, I'm not saying you shouldn't, but in general, I'm more focused on the process that I believe will be sustainable and hopefully lead to playgrounds that we believe have an acceptable level of inclusion far beyond, our life cycles, I guess, so to speak. Life cycles in the district.
Yeah, so we're hoping to get it right, and it's taking us time, and getting our expert to help us is gonna, the committee recognizes we needed assistance, and once we get that, and we're all on the committee are committed to doing this quickly but also right, and do it so it's something we can all be proud of, and I echo it. I think we got a great opportunity at Grant. I really liked what the community members said and what Christine, who corrected me when I talked to her as Dr. Grant, said call me Christine, so I'll call her Christine, that we need to recognize the importance of inclusion of every student, and that accessibility has been an issue that many are struggling with, and that inclusion is important to overcome.
So drilling down to some specifics, you indicated the life cycle of the playground is, we'll just call it 20 years. So Boardwalk was built in 2012. What happened there to their playground that it's 6 years in, needing to be replaced?
Big bid.
From
Windsor Park
is the recorder. Yeah, it's just a recorder.
Well, until he sits down, part of the equipment at Borlaug came from Roosevelt.
So it's just moved from
Right.
Roosevelt.
Yeah. Not all of it, but part of it.
And how old is that equipment?
Well, I don't know, it's at least 20, 25 years old or older.
No, it actually turned out to be slightly younger than what
Was
we
it?
thought. Some of the early playgrounds that were put in by PTOs and different things, it wasn't well documented. And so we actually have playground equipment where we don't actually have the data documentation. So what we rely on is aerial photos to determine how old it is. I went back and double checked it. I know it's somewhere around 15, 16 years old or something of that nature. So that doesn't really change my recommendation to administration to replace it. The way playgrounds work, the liability is based on the equipment. So if you pick the equipment up and move it elsewhere, you got to make sure that the warranty and the liability follows that and whatever. So looking at that piece of equipment from a safety inspector standpoint, there's plumb issues, whether or not it's straight and plumb. Those kind of things can worry us, especially when we know that the equipment was actually moved.
All means level, straight up and down.
Yeah, and so it was a hard decision to make, and we have, 6 or 7 different certified safety inspectors on our crew, and we talked about it amongst a number of them, and we felt that we should stick with the original plan of replacing it, even though it's slightly younger than what we originally thought, and it still works well within the life cycle because we're projected to go in there and replace the fall zone, which we know needs to be upgraded. And it also still works within the life cycle. So every 5 years, we're coming in and trying to replace equipment at the same time as the actual softball and stuff.
So there's one comment I did want to add, and, you know, I added a positive, but I'll add a critique that's legitimate, okay? And, you know, one of the things that we're trying to, or have done, and we did at Longfellow, we did it at Shimmy, was we added some ground activity pieces, okay? So that a child in a wheelchair could get to it. But honestly, the critique and the criticism that is appropriate is that other kids may not want to share that activity. So the idea is create a ramp, create a platform where you might have these activities, but also other activities such as slides or whatever that other children would like to use so that they can congregate on that platform in the middle of the playground. So there's activities for all kids, okay? Now I'm not saying that all kids can use do every activity, but if you put them in the right place relative to each other, you've made it more inclusive. So we get it, and that is a legitimate critique of what's been done today.
Yeah, and just not to lose sight of, wheelchairs are one thing, but we're also talking about trauma,
Right.
autistic kids. So it's not just the physical mobility, it's
Right.
also a lot of other things.
Yeah.
There's the emotional, social part of it, getting kids together to play together, and that's legit. And that's the type of discussions we've been having at the playground committee. And Phil's right. We all agree. We all need to do it.
To kind of expand on that, one of the things that we cover in our certification is it's not actually just the compound structure we're looking at. We're looking at the entire playground. So if you take a step back and look at other things that are going on, it's in our department, but they're painting trails on the hard surfaces for kids to follow in their wheelchairs. That showed up, I believe, at Boardwalk last year. There might be some other ones I don't know about. There's sandboxes. We've incorporated more sound kind of things. One of the ones that was requested, I believe it was of Longfellow, is a toy that mimics the sound of rain. And apparently that's soothing in some sort of way to certain students with disabilities and stuff. So if you take a step back and you look, there are different things that are going on in the playgrounds. There's sandboxes on some of them. There's tether balls on nearly all of them now. We have basketball hoops. We go with the shorter height, so that way it's more accessible to all the students of different ages and stuff. And so when you look at the equipment, it's easy to kind of get fixated on the structure that's right in front of you, but it's actually a bigger picture. And a perfect example of this is actually Longfellow, because you guys are familiar with it. The 4 through 6 is primarily a climbing type structure, and it's a ground entry structure. It's designed that way because the developmental needs of 4 through 6 have to have certain body strength and develop a certain amount of body strength in order to use that equipment. But right across the sidewalk is the 1 through 3 structure. It has more game panels, it has more sound things, it has more slides, it has the transfer stations to get up and interact with the kids. And then across the sidewalk from that one is the pre-K. So when students go out on recesses, and I would say most of the playgrounds that I'm aware of, the kids get to go and play on all those. And they get to interact on all those structures all at one time. There are some exceptions. Borlaug is separated by 2 different halves. So you'll see a little bit of overlap in those designs sometimes. But in general, a lot of the playgrounds are just built around the hard surface. And we've started moving all those structures to the hard surface to improve that accessible route. So there's a lot of things that are actually going on to improve accessibility beyond just the structure itself. So
I have a specific question on an element, and it's the kind of the surface level merry-go-round that's in the Borlaug and Kirkwood pictures. Is that the alternative one that we talked about with Longfellow?
Actually, that 10-wheel that they quoted to us is not. There was an optional one that was shown that's down at the surface level. That's easy for a wheelchair. That's an additional cost.
That one?
That's the one that would cost a little bit more than the other one. The 10-wheel, the 10-spin one, where they were going to provide at no cost to us, but that one would be an upgrade. Do you remember what that cost was?
this one's right around $25,000. The 10-spin, if you just went out and purchased it, it's $10,000. It is at what you would consider an ADA compliant component because it has full body support, full back support on it. Whereas this one is what you would maybe consider more inclusive because you can actually wheel a wheelchair on there versus transferring a student on there.
So that's
it's
not,
a definite upgrade.
that's not in the equipment that we approved this evening, but certainly we could bring back an addendum and do that if you choose to do that.
I just remember in the text of it, so there was an alternate for Longfellow that cost $25,000.
That was it.
That's what, I like that.
So if you'd like us to do that, we can bring that back and get our firm cost. Longfellow.
Yes, for me, but I think we need to work with Chris and the team that he has.
Right.
So, the surface underneath the playground. If the playground committee decides by August, September, surfaces are going to be not whatever surface is there now, or is going to be there under that playground in August, September, what happens?
Well, first, I've said this for several years, but engineered wood fiber, properly maintained, is an approved surface, okay? So but it's a choice. You know, how much does it cost to maintain it over the next 20 years? If you put in rubber, what's the initial cost? What's the life cycle cost? If you put in rubber tile, or you put in rubber mulch, or if you put in artificial turf, all those have a life cycle and a maintenance associated with them. We have to maintain artificial turfs. It's pretty intense on our football fields, no different. So the answer to your question is, that was one of the things I put in the RFQ to let the expert help us determine what the true life cycle costs are for those different types of surfaces. So we can come back to you and say, here, and you can make value choices. Here's a rubber surface, it'll cost you this much, or an artificial turf. So you can help us make those choices based on budgets available. So that's one of the things that I included in the RFQ, is to get assistance to develop the life cycle cost. I've done them, but
That's one of the big things we're struggling with there, and I went out with a group of students and went on a wheelchair with myself and then the students on a wheelchair on the engineered wood fiber, and the challenges with a wheelchair on engineered wood fiber is extremely difficult for mobility. And we don't have, with the maintenance schedule and absolutely the cost on athletic fields. We've gone to sports turf because we've done the math and we say it's better over the long run and the cost and everything that way. That's what we need to come up with this. And our playgrounds are extensions of the classroom, and they are used more than probably any other part of our school facilities, because they're used during the school day, they're used during the after school, they're used before the school, they're used on the weekends and everything, anytime someone has an opportunity to go. So
another way to
So my
answer it.
question though is not what the surface is going to be. That will be determined by the
Right.
committee. My question is, for 20 years, will they have what they are getting? Or are we gonna take it out and put something else in?
you have the ability to take it out and put something else in.
And how much will that cost? Not, okay, we don't know the cost of the surface, it's
Yeah.
just the actual equipment coming in and out.
They retroactively did Van Allen's
Yeah.
rubber tile after the stuff was there. They took out the mulch and the underground stuff, put the tile in around it, and the equipment never left.
Okay.
The secret is to put the equipment at the right elevation or the right height. So when you remove that, and then you allow yourself enough room to come in and put material in and raise that new surface back to the same height.
So that's what we're going to do?
That's
Is we're
what-
going
yes.
to prepare a surface that will leave all options open to us?
It leaves future options in the future open to you if you put the equipment in the right place, and we will do our best to do that.
So to
Nothing is
clarify,
impossible, impossible just costs more.
Yeah.
And it's best, yeah, things can be done down the road. It's best if we do it right the first time and not have to go back.
The other part of that answer would be my preference to bring in playgrounds in the future, to bring you a base playground structure with a base surface, and here's the upgrade, okay?
I'm just concerned about the next 20 years,
Right.
and I don't want Weber and Warlock to be left with something that everybody else is going to be getting something better.
so I just want to clarify that real quick, because one of the things that we've done, one of the non-compliance things that we identified on the playgrounds early on is there was actually berms going into the playground, which messed with the accessibility route. And although we knew we didn't have the funds at the time, we knew that there's a capability, or possibility rather, in the future that the school district would either want sidewalks all the way around it or hard surfaces. So these playground upgrades, a lot of what's going on, the more important stuff is what's going on the outside. We're actually removing those berms, we're leveling that, we're making sure the structure's exactly like Dwayne said, at the elevation that we need in order to make those upgrades in the future. And so what we call out in the specs is typically a 6-foot wide path all the way around, the entire fall zone in preparation for any sort of hard surface that would come in there. To clarify things a little bit farther, there's questions about the alternate 1, alternate 2 in there and that. The alternate 1, early on in the planning process, when I first started working with the landscape architects and engineers, was whether or not we wanted to have a direct bury, which means the post goes 4 feet into the ground, or if we wanted to have what's called a surface mount, so it bolts to the top of the concrete. And a lot of times that's dictated by what fall zone was in there. And so what I was trying to do is create an option when I went and requested those quotes, so that way I could send it on to Dwayne or whoever, and they'd be able to see if they changed the options, or if the board elected to change the options in the process, what kind of change in price that would be. It turned out it was actually none. And so that's kind of clarification here.
So that would address the surface question. Sounds like that's a non-issue.
I think you have a lot of flexibility.
Okay, so, but the actual equipment itself, should the the playground committee determine that they want 3 ramps on every item?
I think
That's not gonna happen.
what I was trying to say is ultimately, I think we're gonna have to look at it from a phased approach. I mean, yeah, so probably maybe not be able to happen right away, but I think we need to outline a plan. And I think a lot of your question isn't going to be able to be answered tonight, because that's part of kind of the process by which we're thinking about, or which we have to come back with recommendations as far as, if you will, if the playground committee ultimately decides that, there has to be 3 ramps. And my process for thinking about that would be very similar to the DOJ's process for thinking about that. It would have to be a phased approach. How does that look like? What are the budget considerations? I mean, there's more work to that standpoint. I don't think we can answer that question.
And I understand totally that would be a phased approach. We're not gonna just wake up someday and have new playgrounds everywhere. But my concern is, this is going to be new. So did we miss an opportunity there? If we would have just waited 6 months.
I do feel like we need to make actually some closure to this discussion, because we've had a big discussion on the attendance area work. And so we had 3 consent items in front of us that we chose to pull into work session tonight. Anita has said, I'm comfortable waiting to see the outcome of the playground committee and the inclusive requirements, make sure you're, and where the design and where it falls and that kind of thing. That's fantastic. I think for Borlaug and Weber, we need to have a similar conversation with the groups that have gone through the design process. Are they willing to wait? I don't know the severity of the safety issues that you were talking about, Ben. If there are significant safety issues, for me, that's going to be a decider.
Right.
But if we believe we can wait a year and get this good discussion on what inclusive play looks like, we've got the guidelines in hand, we understand what the impacts are. If we can wait, it might make sense, but I would not make that call without having a conversation with the teams at those schools who've gone through this process, because they've dedicated their time and energy following the rules to get us to this point. But I sort of think it's worth begging that question. Is it worth waiting a year to get it right? But if that group says, no, the safety's too concerning or whatever, I mean, I think we're at the point where we probably should live with the recommendations of these teams and put the options forward. It's my take on it.
And I would just request, though, if you're going to ask them for their opinion and they say yes, and you say no,
I understand that's a bad thing to do too. Don't ask their opinion, and we're going to overrule it. Completely agree.
So the one thing I would caution everybody with is we do still have a couple of big years coming up, because we're going to have to put in playgrounds at Grantwood, and we're going to have to put in playgrounds at Maine, which are going to be larger playgrounds. So those big expenses will be happening at the same time. So if we shift that back, we're going to have some conflicts to work out. But I could definitely go and work with the groups and communicate with them and see what their thoughts are on waiting.
Is it worth waiting? I mean, I know you went through a thought process, and so.
Well, we got moved up 3 years on the renovation plan, and so we're at a unique spot, I feel like, because I don't know what that front entrance is going to look like. And I don't want to put a playground right outside the front door, but I want it to be close, so for me, I feel like we're in a unique spot.
Absolutely.
We can certainly have a conversation with them, let you know.
But also, like Janet mentioned, take into consideration the safety factors, because if there's significant safety factors, I just wouldn't, in good conscience, want kids to plan on that and the liability that the district would
Right.
have to face, knowing that there's some significant safety risk, and we're on record as acknowledging that.
Right. So I don't want to create like a fear element here, because we do routinely inspect these things, and we do go through and we replace bolts and we replace broken parts, and if there's a big enough safety thing, we'll actually shut the entire structure
Okay.
down. We actually had to do that at Wood Elementary. It just gets into the routine and how much money do we spend versus what that life cycle is, and it's not so much an immediate danger, we're at the time where we can have better, more safe, up-to-date equipment, and so trying to balance that, it's more what it's about with the safety thing versus isn't an immediate safety risk, because we address those right away.
So is the board comfortable that the next step is taking back to Woodlawn and Weber and saying, we've got this inclusive playbook that's underway with the playground committee, we know we're gonna get some guidelines and direction there. It won't be in time to inform your redesigned playgrounds. Are you willing to wait?
We can certainly do it before the next board agenda, and if we determine that waiting's fine with the groups, I won't even post them on the agenda.
Okay, is the board comfortable with that as a way to continue moving this forward?
If I place it on the agenda, you can assume that they really don't want to wait and that there's a safety issue. Fair enough?
I think we have to honor the process that was
Yeah.
in place when these groups started. Yes, Anita?
Any chance that possibly the swings and the net could come in? Because that was going to go further away from the building. Just thought I'd throw that out there.
I don't know exactly what that means. I hope
So,
that does.
yeah, so,
Were they gonna be standalone?
Anita's comments to me were conditional. She still wants to put in her swings.
right,
And I said, we need to look at if we're going to look at the overall design, we need to look at the overall design, unless they are safety issues.
right. So the only thing I would say is that I don't want to slow down on getting ADA swings in there. We haven't had any in the past, we're trying to get those up to speed. So I think those we move forward to, and then I'd follow admin's recommendation on components. Decide.
Yeah, and the swings aren't even shown here.
Yeah, so,
The option we're looking at.
yeah, so we have like two different standards. One of them's from a company we take bids from for the structures, and the other one's from a completely different company. And so you wouldn't see them on there because we have kind of a standardized two types that we actually use. We don't include it in that bid, but it's purchased as like a amenities upgrade side of things. So.
I would just ask that in this decision of putting it on the agenda or not, if you could include some objective information about the
I will.
safety risks.
If-
So we know, are we talking about a scale of 1 to 10 and we're at a 9, or are we talking 4?
If we put it on the agenda, I will give you all that criteria to go with it. If we pull it off, you can make the assumption that they were okay with it. Okay?
Anything else on this topic? Thank you all for your contributions. We're going to move on to the next item, attendance areas. I'll take input from board members. Sarah, you're going to come sit with us, please. On where we're going to start, there's a lot of content here. There's the presentation, that started this kind of a education discussion, just to put forward the vision and the case of change and options for achieving equity in our schools. We all have a whole bunch of maps that the admin team has provided us. Perhaps the best thing for us to do is to start with the document, the PowerPoint, and talk through the case for change, why we're doing this, and if we don't get clear and agree on why, then we can start talking through the process for addressing what we're trying to accomplish. So with that, does that seem reasonable? Talk about the deck first, the why. This is, I shared this with the board members after our last discussion on this. I can't remember what it was. A long
Yeah, I
time
don't
ago.
know, but I also shared with Sarah.
It's been a long time.
We invited her to participate in this conversation.
And we had this posted on Board Docs, so folks hopefully had a chance to review it. So I would open it up to folks' comments, questions, ideas, recommendations for input on what we're trying to do and the why, the vision, what are we trying to accomplish? Is that reflected in the document, in the PowerPoint or not? Where can we strengthen it?
almost would like to come back to that at the end,
What's that?
about your PowerPoint document here, because as we go through this, maybe we're going to talk about some different things, and it's our vision or whatever's coming forward to this presentation to go out to the community, maybe a little bit different than what's presented here.
Yeah, no, I think it's fair. So I'm seeking input and ideas and, what do we want, what is our shared vision of what we're trying to accomplish? I think if we don't have that solid, as a board, we're not going to be able to work through this process. And so I think we have to get close to clear on what we're doing and why. What's the vision of what we're trying to accomplish? I'm seeking input. I know people have lots of ideas. We should just jump right in.
Yeah, I can make a suggestion. So I would remove all deficit language in the document. Even here's one statement, it's possible for high poverty schools to succeed in where, ultimately, you want, so there's a couple of concerns, but I think that ultimately, that diversity is important. There's tons of research that speaks to just having a diverse environment, what that means, that is important. I think focusing just on that element, I think is good enough. I think ultimately when this was in prior conversation before, some of the elements about poverty and FRO was going around in the news, not only at the board table, but also at the community. And that becomes problematic because that ultimately is just coded language about who is going to be changed or removed or whatever the case may be. I mean, if this is truly about diversity and wanting diverse schools because it's an enriching environment, then that's what it's about. So I know there's a lot of there's tons of elements in here about different things, and I don't want to take apart or talk about each one, but just in general, just taking out all deficit language, I think is ultimately what the community is going to hear and feel. And I can tell you that in the last conversation, the community did not feel good about it. So, and it's still impacting my job, and I think all of our jobs today.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's the big thing. Diversity is good. We have it in our districts. Great. Let's have it all over our districts. I mean, it's just and that's the truth as I see it. That it's a real advantage. I grew up in a really homogenous place, and I did not benefit from that. And when I came to Iowa City in the 90s, it was not very diverse, but sought it out. And I know, the experience. Certainly, my daughter's having right now in a much more diverse school. I just see and hear it in her friends, and it's just her lived experience, and it's such a benefit. And it's really, and we've got some areas where we can do some things that aren't, I believe, going to be too disruptive to really better balance that out. So, to me, that's the why. This is a really great opportunity to bring our schools in closer to one another.
So, and I just want to say too, I'm a lady with a lot of opinions, but I'm really going to be speaking tonight from my role as the Executive Director of the Affordable Housing Coalition, so I want to be really clear about that Sarah Barron person may disagree or not fully, with some of these things. But, when all the research into not in my backyard, right, we're all familiar with this when it comes to affordable housing or low-income housing. In other words, yes, people should have it, but just not by me, right? And so that's really a parallel with your conversations about better school integration. And one of the things that they're really cautioning affordable housing advocates right now is that if you spend a lot of time reinforcing the myths, even if you're going to then turn around and refute them, that basically people walk away with, yep, I heard them say that myth again. I mean, there's just like a psychological thing about that. So to Kingsley's point about taking out the deficit language, I think that's good. I was looking at some of the articles I've sent to you and some of the things I've read over time, and one of the things that really stood out to me is that in Louisville, Kentucky, when they were working to integrate the schools, it was in the 1970s, 98% of residents were opposed to the school desegregation plan. They did it anyway. After 40 years, almost 90% of parents were happy with it.
40 or 4?
Yeah, they did it for 40 years. So, I'm sorry. Okay, so it was first proposed in the 1970s. In 2011, a survey found that 89% of parents in the school district favored basically that same plan. So almost everyone was against it when it started. So, I mean, just to give you some perspective, that was the 1970s, but I think sometimes we give ourselves more credit for how far we've come than we really have.
I would concur with that, and I was kind of briefing Steve about a potential comment that I'm going to make. I think in general, when we're thinking about diversity and having a diverse environment, we don't take into account all the different stakeholders that may or may not be affected. So we hear from the parents, and sometimes we hear from the teachers. The issue is that if we're going to make changes, we have to make sure that the people in the building are ready for those changes. And so there have been some changes just recently with some of the boundaries that we had that have had some issues because there's been a lack of, remember, I'm losing words, but there's been a lack of maybe there's a lack of, there's some areas for more growth as far as having a growth mindset for all kids. And so I think because of that, it makes it, we have to be very clear about how we're moving kids around, why we're moving kids around. I mean, I can give you an example now that Nate is here. Not to throw Nate up under the bus, but on the bus. Kirkwood is a great school that has a very diverse population. We've implemented a number of different initiatives. She has a number of staff of color that work for her. By moving kids around, we will change the nature of that school. I'm not saying that it's still not important to have diverse staff there, but then the staff that may be displaced, where do they go? What do they then see? Who do they then have contact with? All those relationships, I think, are important. I mean, that's part of your deliberations as well. It's not an easy issue. Obviously, that's why you're doing it, and I'm just sitting on the sidelines guiding your path. But I do think you have to think about that in your feedback and your deliberation, because you don't want to put a situation where, everybody in general, this is about bias as well. Implicit bias speaks to everybody in general. If you ask them, I'm not racist, I have no bias, but the way they enact their biases are highly implicit. And I think that if you did send a survey out as far as whether or not people feel comfortable about these things, you would get something similar from that standpoint. And we've seen some of the ramifications at the board table tonight and in prior nights. And so it's not out of the realm of possibility to believe that we're not where we think we are.
I could add to that as well, again, back to kind of the housing desegregation piece. Right now, in Iowa City, they're looking at rezoning the Forest View neighborhood, and that includes moving several residents who are in trailers that are really broken down, not safe, stable homes, putting them in new homes in another area of the Forest View redevelopment. Okay, so it's a tremendous opportunity, including a path for home ownership for the residents of that neighborhood. Because the development is now going to be adjacent to an existing neighborhood, the planning and zoning meeting has been filled with neighbors expressing their concern that the residents of Forest View may not feel welcome or be able to integrate into the existing neighborhood. Okay, so that's just one example of where we're at right now with that conversation. And there's every reason to anticipate you will hear similar comments.
Well, Sarah, we've heard those comments. Before I was on the board, we had speakers come and talk about Lincoln changing demographics and say, we don't want that. I mean, we have people come to the mic and say that, so we are here.
I guess, I get to a place where, and definitely I think the example from this year that, maybe it wasn't, the groundwork wasn't laid or prep, even with, at Northwest and North Central. And so I think we have to do a better job of that, and then responding to those people who will say, not in my backyard. I want them to come along with us on this journey, but I'm not going to wait for them. I mean, I just don't feel, I was at a conference last week and talking to some folks from Des Moines, and when I kind of mentioned some of the stuff we're doing in diversity and moving forward, they're like, it's just a frustration. Like, we're sick and tired of waiting. It's always never right now. And when do you move the bar forward? And I don't, but again, being sensitive to, I don't want to throw kids under the bus. I don't want to have them have, although at some point, we are going to do that. And kids are, because right now we're doing it, right? We have some situations that just aren't, for our low FRL schools, that's not a fair learning environment. I mean, that's just that doesn't reflect our community at all, right? So it's sort of this, if it was Waukee or if it's, but we don't really have, we have some of that, some of that. North Liberty's tougher area, it's not quite as diverse, but I don't know how we, when Dr. King, ended up supporting those kids in the Children's March, they made huge change because they were kids. And I don't think we're going to have that degree of stuff, but what I've seen is when you put kids together, like they'll work it out. Some things they will work out, and even if their parents aren't ready, whether it's dealing with kids with disabilities, the way I've seen kids respond to differences in other kids, it's like a lot of times it's really good, and it surprises us how much more resilient they can be. But at the same time, I don't know.
I want to also add, just because I know you want to make a decision from a place that's like research and data informed, right? That it's difficult to find cities like ours in lots of the research, because so much of the research is focused on the largest metropolitan areas, and that makes doing work in this area a challenge. But one thing that I can say that pops up over and over again in research is that small to mid-sized cities like ours that have a university are some of the most racially and economically segregated in the country, especially if you look at like the top 350. Where Penn State is located is #1 on poverty segregation. We're somewhere around 14. Ames is somewhere around 8. And there's a real trend. If you look at that list, you can identify the major university in each of those small to mid-sized cities. So there's some developing research in that area. It's not going to benefit you on this current timeline, probably. So it's really something to think about and just be able to talk about that we face a particular challenge as a small community with a fairly large university, and we see the issues we're facing reflected in those other communities.
And maybe I'd add one thing to this conversation just to think about as we're moving forward. We have had a lot of conversation about the value of neighborhood schools. We've talked about walkable schools and making sure that students and families have a connection to it. One of the things that we know is that we have a lot of kids that don't go to their neighborhood school. We're better than we are before because we used to give people a lifetime pass. You got a voluntary transfer out and you were good for the rest of your elementary career, which for us is 7 years. If you look at the data that we put together for you on the radii from a school, you'll find that if these students who lived in the neighborhood of our 5 most economically challenged schools, if the kids who went to school in that school lived in that neighborhood, you would see a substantial drop in the poverty rate in that school. Because we have students whose families are choosing not to send their kids to their neighborhood school. There's still 800 kids. When I came here, we were over 1,700. We're still down to about 800 elementary kids that don't go to school at their neighborhood school. And so when you think about who's opting out and then who stays, what we're seeing is that our voluntary transfer policy, our process, is reinforcing that economic segregation. So I might not be able to afford to live in that neighborhood, but I'm going to live in this neighborhood where I can afford to and send my kids to that school because I've got the ability to transport them on my own because we don't provide that transportation. So I think that's a really important aspect of our conversation is to think about how we have allowed a process which has exacerbated the challenges that we're talking about here. That would be wildly unpopular, and I'm just saying it, I'm likely probably to get some feedback from people who find that to be distasteful. But
if you look at the 2 mile radii, the distribution across the schools changes dramatically.
Right.
It really does.
Yeah, and I'll also add here that there's a pile of research that shows that the people who take advantage of school choice options, whatever they might be, that generally exacerbates the segregation rather than immediately.
And it's pretty pronounced if you look at that data for
I mean,
us.
if we're serious about desegregating on all levels, that's something that, even though it won't be wildly popular and will probably get full,
Anything we
it's something
do-
that has to be on the table, because what I don't want us to do is move certain kids out of a building into another building without moving other kids into that building, and we've seen that. And it's not working. It's
It's
not.
where the neighborhood school actually kind of, I mean, if we did take voluntary transfer away, I mean, if, and again, people would hate it, but it would be the same sort of rule for everybody. And that within your you go to your neighborhood school. That's what you do.
Okay, now here I have one asterisk to add
Yes,
again from the
we're
housing
just saying here, this-
point of view, which is that, one of the things that we're looking at too is that, like, my ultimate goal for people is, we say affordable housing, but really it's stable housing. And there are three legs to that stability stool, right? One is safe. It's got to be a place they can occupy. One is appropriate. It has to be a place that meets their family's needs. And the other is affordable. So all of those things go into the stable housing that we want. And for families who are struggling to afford their housing, that stability is significantly compromised. When you're looking at mobility issues for your schools, and in particular for families that are struggling economically, and you have this rule that says you go just to whatever school is your neighborhood school, you might want to look at, if you're really looking at this as a tool, not just for addressing diversity within schools, but also the achievement of students, you might want to look at the possible negative impact that has on students whose housing is really mobile or changing a lot.
Yeah, one of the things that, Sarah is a great point, one of the things that we've always done is we've said, especially those who move in the middle of the year, because we have a lot of first of the month transition. And so we've always said you can finish out wherever you start. So wherever you are on August 23rd, you are entitled to go to school there until June 1st. But what many of them struggle with is absent transportation. They wind up moving to wherever the local school is because, like you said before, that adverse selection piece tends to be those with means. And those without means, we try to help from that standpoint, but often they can't take advantage of it. And that is an enormous struggle for them. Lori was asking about that earlier. When we measure mobility and stability, and they show us two different things: how many kids are there over the course of the whole year that started on day one, finished on day N, and then how many are in and out over the course of the year. And you talk to the folks at our high need schools, and they talk a lot about that mobility issue and the impact that it has on the kids as they move in and out of the school.
So it would be pretty easy probably to show us what the data looks like if there was no voluntary transfer.
It's on your radii, I think.
Yeah,
Oh, where
let's
is
look at the 2-year radii.
2 mile.
That's that question that
2 mile.
Lori was asking.
The only issue with that is that there might be 800 kids.
Right.
Too.
Yep, there's a lot of overlap.
So,
Maybe we would only be sending 69 kids to this.
I think what JP is saying, is within our current boundaries, if everybody just attended.
One of the things that we did, and I know they've done a revision on Guide K-12, so I'd have to get back in there and find out if we could do it, but we used one of the GIS layers that actually ask the software to assign every child to the closest school. So that way, if they lived in one of those intersection areas where there are two schools that might be within 1 mile or 2 miles, that it would pick the school that was closest and send it to them. We haven't done that analysis since about 2013, I think. But that's definitely something that we could do. I didn't think about it while we were going through this process. That was one of those conversations that came up at one of our admin meetings late last week, and we didn't have time to run that. But that would help us with that one, especially where there's some areas where we have some kids that might live within 2 miles of 3 schools. So it would help us figure out where the closest school is and then what those numbers might look like from that standpoint.
And this isn't coming up to see the maps, but I know you had the maps with the circles, then did we see what the demographic data would look like?
Yeah.
It's the radius data request.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I can't make it work, so.
Yes.
Let's see if this one works since it's wired.
Oh, there we go. One thing I want to throw in here while you're booting that up, because I know you're spending a lot of time talking about how you may or may not respond to our economically segregated neighborhoods. There's also some pretty good data that shows that schools that practice more careful integration maintain better integration in their neighborhood. So in other words, you have the ability to impact what our economic segregation looks like or doesn't look like.
Careful integration, what is that?
I'm-
Dimensions of that.
I'm just saying that schools that tend to integration as a piece of how they enroll their schools, so that you
Okay.
have a practice of
Got it.
integration.
Okay.
You can shape over time what the neighborhoods look like, and neighborhoods maintain better integration if the schools are also more integrated. We hear a lot of people concerned about their property values as we go through this process. And as a homeowner, I understand that concern. I don't have anything saved except for what I have in my house, let's be honest. But there's also a mountain of research that shows that that's a fear that's an unjustified fear. But
I'd say in Iowa City, in our 5 municipality region, it's definitely not been an issue, as we see property values continue to increase.
Well, but we also see issues in kind of what Sarah was talking about earlier with like 4 Oaks, where someone recognizes a real estate bargain, and I don't know how many students we had coming out of that area before.
About 60?
And how many do we have now?
Ooh, single digits, I think.
Okay. And that's something we don't have, our control on this is telling people where to go, or machines and diesel fuel.
Right.
And sometimes we're just playing whack-a-mole trying to figure out exactly, because the game changes, and those with the means can go where they help self-select anything we do.
yeah, and that's a fair. I don't want to cherry pick either. It is true that in school districts that have worked on integration, sometimes it leads over a period of a decade or 2 decades to a lot of white flight. I think this might be more Sarah Barron person.
That's okay.
Okay.
Switching gears.
But so that's definitely a concern. On one hand, though, the Iowa City Community School District is so in such a better position to address this than, say, like Des Moines, because in Des Moines that white flight has already happened. The school districts are already pieced out so that white flight is very easy. Here we have a pretty big area with lots of diversity to draw from, and Clear Creek is an option for folks certainly, but we don't have that same.
I was going to piggyback on that. We are very different than Des Moines, Waterloo, Dubuque, Davenport, because we don't have large school districts next door. Because in those communities, North Liberty and Coralville would be separate school districts. Here they're part of our district, and that's a real plus for us because it gives us a different platform to deal with this issue, where you don't have people simply picking up, packing their bags and moving to the neighboring school district. I guess you could go to Solon, or you could go to Mid Prairie, or you could go to Lone Tree, but you don't have a Bettendorf or a Waukee or a Western Dubuque or something like that you can go to. And so it allows us, I think, an opportunity to have a little bit more of that robust, rigorous discussion without that fear.
Well, and we do happen to have a lot of great educational opportunities. I mean, I would put the district up against, we've got a lot of areas for growth, but I'd certainly put us up against any district in the state as far as what we offer.
You're trying to bring up stuff.
I was trying to bring that chart up.
Yeah, it's,
We think the board doc servers
servers.
issuing.
I think it's because Kevin's gone. That's it. It's gone.
I blamed it on Kristen for being the recording secretary. So
30, 40 years of experience.
our board doc server is not working. I don't know why.
We can't pull up some of the documents.
I was going to show, JP was asking about that, and I can't get it to come.
But that's a one straightforward thing. And then there's also just some areas where there is overlap, where there's probably some opportunity that, especially where we have schools that are very disparate.
Right.
And very close together.
Right.
And
especially if you look at this data, you realize that it really is in those areas in particular how we're drawing the maps that's making a difference. And if sending kids to schools that are closer allows their families greater opportunities to participate, and by doing so, we can better integrate our schools, I think that's an opportunity that we've got to
This was
have.
what I was looking at, where I pulled out.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's so much less color difference in that.
Oh, yeah.
But, and then, you know, and as we kind of unfold this conversation, we've got some areas that are clearly gonna be, I mean, hills, obviously, right? But, you know, there.
Hills,
maybe there-
actually, if you do within a mile of hills, it's 55. Right now, it's 75.
So, big improvement.
If you do it 2
Alexander's
miles,
really
it's
tough.
47,
Right.
right?
But that's
So-
only 69 kids.
I know, but I mean, it's still, you
But
look
it
at that.
changes the, because that's the thing
It
too.
does, but
when-
then you gotta fill the rest of that school.
But what we
Well-
were talking about was if we could do the, let's draw from within that 1 or 2 mile circle, send them to their closest school, then look at the non-assigned kids and figure out how does that then fit into how do you fill the rest of the holes in the map? What might that look like if you did some optimal map drawing that way?
I also want to add my understanding of the law is that you cannot assign an individual child to a school based on their race.
No.
But you can draw boundaries with race in mind.
So you can.
Okay, so that's another, in addition, the socioeconomic status also, but, so you can't say like, I'm black, so I get to go to this school, but
Correct.
if there are neighborhoods or whatever, you have that option. Sometimes we don't know that.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have, because you know, when I think about some schools, the problem really is mobility. And that is
Mhm.
one of those things that's gonna be very difficult to do anything about because it is what it is. Families gotta move to where it's affordable but if we can flatten out the other issues, then that's not as much of, and if kids are mobile, but you have a more equitable experience across all your school, that helps those mobile kids to go into that new school that's, you know, and again, not just has adequate reading, language arts instruction, or math, but is the staff ready for that group of kids? You
And-
know,
That's hugely important.
Which when there's less disparity, hopefully, in the schools.
Well, and
more
we are a
similar.
long way from that, but
Yeah.
there's,
It's just something I've been, we want our schools to be better balanced, but we also need more teachers of color. We need to make sure that we've got teachers that students can relate to and see
Mhm.
themselves in, and we know we've got big goals in that area from our last board meeting where we talked about that, and those bodacious goals that for next year, I'm not quite sure we've got the pipeline to meet, so I'm very interested in not just the balancing of the schools, but what are these other things that we're doing to ensure success once we do that? Teachers of color, programming, I mean, the Fifth Ward Saints kinds of ideas. Avid has been successful at Kirkwood and is being expanded. I know I've broken record on these things, restorative practices, implicit bias training you mentioned. We have to do all of these things together as a holistic means of helping our students be successful.
And I think one of the things that, some of those things have been challenges for years, and some of them we've worked really hard to remediate, and they would have happened before you arrived on the board. But, you know, a big example of that is when I got here, we had multi-age schools, multi-grade schools, and straight grade schools. So as a student, you could move from one school to another, and it was like moving to a new planet. We had multiple language arts curricula and multiple math curricula. So you might move to a new school and get a different math book. You might get a different ELA book. And one of the things that we did was we started looking at our mobility data and said how unfair that is for a child who goes to the Iowa City Community School District through no fault of their own to move to a new school and discover that they have to deal with a whole new grade structure, a whole new ELA curricula, a whole new math curricula. And so we said that's not going to work for our kids, therefore we are not going to do that. It took us a while, but we just settled on straight grading. We did it at all of our buildings. We turned it over to our math team, we have one math curricula. We turned it over to our ELA team, we have one ELA curricula. So that way, as students move, they have fewer hurdles that we artificially place in front of them. And I think that's really important for us to recognize because that's just 3 examples, but there are others. And so as we identify those, what can we do to rectify those?
So that map that you were talking about, is that something that your team could,
Mhm. Yeah,
get
like I said,
a-
I knew how to do it in the old version of the software. I have to work with Adam, and we talked about it, and they've changed some things around the software, so I'm not sure exactly how to do it, but that would give us a start.
What do you guys think is something
To looking at
worthwhile looking at? We're looking at all kinds of things.
Yeah.
We
So-
can look at it, but
Yeah.
it still doesn't take away that we're gonna have to make some hard decisions.
That would be a hard
Eventually,
decision.
We're gonna have to make some hard decisions, and we can keep looking at stuff like that, but it's not gonna move the needle. It's not enough.
Yeah.
So.
It helps, but I mean, you look at that data, I mean, you still could have schools with 69%, 64%.
So,
In the
you know,
2
maybe-
mile or the 1 mile?
I was looking at the 1 mile.
Yeah, 1 mile is much
Yeah.
more, oh, I can't do
Yeah.
that again. 2 miles.
You know, I think it might be the server, because I'm on my phone for the internet and I'm not having a problem.
Yeah, I'm having problems for both.
Oh, you threw your phone as well?
On my phone, I
Oh.
am. I can't.
I tried disconnecting my internet too, I was having problems with it. I'm not sure what it is.
So I'm just using pause.
There you go.
So, the question is, if we're gonna have a timeline of November to have a vote, we gotta get some of these hard decisions moving. I mean, we can't keep sitting here talking about it, we gotta decide what we're gonna do. Because it's not gonna come to us easy,
No.
it's gonna be very hard. Been through it a few times, on the parent side.
Yeah, if we start with what maps look like when you remove voluntary transfer, and then I think you see where you need to make some boundary adjustments, where you have the most bang for your buck, and then see how far that gets us. And we're not gonna probably get this in the first shot either. That we're not gonna bring, right, and so this may be, and not that we wanna move everything around, but I think we wanna get the lowest hanging fruit right away.
And there's some data that, I'll just say, from the 2016 process that we went through. So, and I know, Steve, these aren't today's numbers, but, we would say something like, an island, Lake Ridge Island. Tell us how many kids are there and what's their makeup? What do they look like?
Yep.
And so if you move that group of kids here, what happens? That group of kids here, what happens?
And we approved that.
So we could look at, we can ask you to do new data,
Yep.
or we could just look at some of that data and say, yeah, it's not gonna be 100% correct, but it gives us an idea.
Yeah.
Because there were an awful lot of those chunks that we talked about in 2016.
And that was when Adam showed us the breakdown of the data points on the map. Yeah, everything. There were many islands of both wealth and less.
So I'm just saying, some of that data is there in our board docs right now. We could look at it. If we can get into board docs, which is another issue. But I don't want to get into this analysis of data so much that we just spin and we never make hard
agree.
decisions.
I agree, and I think we're all ready to make the hard decisions. I think we're still, though, trying to understand what options we have in front of us that can help us get there.
First, we have to see the data and the numbers and the percentages, and that'll be really important. But then the next step is, if these are decisions we make, how does that impact the kids? And what do we do ahead of time to make sure that we are, maybe it's that, if we find implicit bias training is working really well, I don't think we're going to get the number of minority teachers we need soon enough to do this. And we do, but in the meantime, I think we also, find those teachers who really are ready for this kind of thing, and who maybe have, taken implicit bias training and really see things with that lens now, and understand, because we're gonna, if we're gonna make changes in 2 years, and as robust of an effort as we can do to recruit more minority teachers and administrators, by and large, we're gonna mostly have the teachers and administrators we have right now. And so that's what we're gonna have to work with to.
2 years, that's a pretty decent.
And believe me, I'm pushing for this. I want to. I'm also look at our trend, and we're not moving.
It's a tough situation because the sense of urgency is immense. Last week we heard the Twain letter of how many educators at that school, 20-something, contributed to that, saying we can't do this anymore. And so we have, and I know I see the cringing, but that was community comment last board meeting, wasn't it?
Yes.
And so we hear this, and there's these pleas for help, and that does not sit well with me when we're saying it's this far out before we're going to be able to be making changes. But so there's a sense of urgency, but I also have this, we have to do it in a way that's going to be as successful as possible for students and for families and teachers, so that my other worry, and I mean, you guys probably know about me, I have all kinds of free-floating anxiety and worry all the time. I'm worried that if we rush into changes and we're not ready, we could actually make things worse. We could do damage that would be very difficult for us to come back from. And so I'm in this funny place of high sense of urgency, but gosh, we got to do it right. So, and I don't have the answers, obviously. So.
Well, one thing I would add to that is, and this is just my personal opinion, is that I think moving kids is a big deal, so you don't want to do it and then do it again. Like, let's try and get a product that we like, instead of saying, this is good for now, but hold on,
Yeah, right.
we're not finished.
I mean, that's the conversation I have with a lot of people who want continuity, some sense of stability, that they know they hear their kids going to go to this school. And, you know, if you happen to be North Liberty, where there's been so much growth and there's new schools being built, people see that. But, you know, I think, you know, that's a big thing. If we can get it to some sort of, this is what we have, and always work from that. I think we should always be reviewing this, because we have a growing community, so these things change.
And I'd like to add to that too, that right now we're not seeing any indication that poverty levels are going to go down in our area. So you're trying to address something that's moving ahead as you work to address it, particularly with respect to housing costs. So wages are going up like this, housing costs are going up like this. So that gap is getting wider and wider in terms of what people can afford in this
What's the
facility.
median house that was sitting there?
Well, the average median household income in Iowa City metro area is $85,000 for a family of four. That is really high for a median income. And we have a whole lot of people who are at 50 or 30% of that median income, like a significant percentage.
Right. And what's the house value? Do you know the house value?
Oh, the house value.
Close
To do
like
the
197.
backward math from that, I guess, but yeah. So, you know, especially among renters, the number of people who are cost burdened by their housing is over 50%. So over 50% of people who rent their homes are paying more than 30% of their monthly income in housing costs. That's one of those three things that makes it really unlikely that they'll remain in their housing for a long period. They're going to be looking for something else. So you want to, especially when you're thinking about stability, look at those areas where there are a lot of rentals, because that's really going to, I mean, maybe that's common sense, but the data shows really strongly that people who own their home are much less likely to have that motivation for looking for something else. So, yeah. That's not very optimistic. What else can I tell you? Oh, I can say that the cities are working on addressing integrated neighborhoods. So, you know that you're doing this in tandem with municipal efforts. Every single of the main cities is engaged in its own way in addressing housing affordability and more integrated neighborhoods, including Iowa City, which is the first city in the state of Iowa to have inclusionary zoning. And in part, so all the riverfront crossings area, any housing that's built there, 10% of it has to be dedicated to like an income targeted housing for affordability, or the developer has to pay money into a fund that funds other affordable housing. But anyway, the point is there's this effort being made, and they just passed through planning and zoning. It's going to go to the council. That land annexation is also going to have that same thing. So as the city grows, there will be an expectation that affordable housing is included in that. Just for one example, so
for riverfront crossings, let's just talk about that for a second. So the affordable housing that's going to go in there, is it going to be occupied, do you think, by students or by families?
well, it's difficult for students to income qualify for a lot of different kinds of affordable housing. It depends, but it depends on if they're getting like some kind of federal affordability or if they're just looking at income level, because most student incomes, it's difficult for them to qualify for like a HUD program because of how it calculates income. It's like federal loans, you know, like when you get, yeah, right. So
it counts as parents'
yeah.
income.
So a lot of those programs are more geared toward permanent Iowa City residents. There will be some students, especially more non-traditional students, who are also able to take advantage of it. But
Once they have a kid or are 25, I think they'll take parent, just look at parents' income
Okay.
financially. Thanks.
Still could consider them kind of quasi-dependent.
right, and then if they have a roommate, I mean, so there's a lot of other, you know, the household is not just an individual family. It's sometimes, yeah. Yeah, so you're working in partnership with the cities, know that, and
We did get an email today from the Coralville City Council.
Yeah.
Supporting them. So.
And we talked about it very, very briefly with the last joint entities, and I think, you know, if we wanted to sort of make a formal ask of that group to partner with us in whatever form, shape, or fashion, because it is going to take all of our efforts to do
And I
this
think
in a
this will-
sustainable way.
This could help drive some of that too, help drive our neighbors to be more integrated.
So next steps, the little air maps.
We'll work on that for you.
The,
Already working with Adam to see what we can do on that. To work on that as quick as possible for you. What else you need?
chance we can have the next work session.
I'm hoping so.
So these would be maps,
We'll do the closest map,
okay.
and then we'll do the demographics for it so you can see that. Be able to compare it to what we have right now.
So I'm going to be, and I say the thing that nobody in this room wants to hear, meeting once a month, work session once a month is not going to get this done by November. It's not. This is a hard process. So we're going to have to do more work sessions. I'm
Well,
sorry
I
to
think
say it,
that
guys,
in the
but
summer,
Well,
our
I'm hoping-
presentation meetings are gonna be pretty light on presentations.
I think we can do a lot of this in the summer. I'll get some good headway, so by the fall, we've looked at maybe a couple maps, we've got some ideas out there. Because I don't think we're gonna start to get the community comment until maps are there. Because then people will
I
say.
can tell you, you're not going to get the community out until the maps are there.
Right, right. And so once we have maps, I think that'll generate a lot more feedback, and drive be further driving this thing. So if we keep ahead of it.
I can also tell you, just from having pulled everyone's schedules to try to get a board retreat on the calendar, a lot of people are gone a whole bunch of June, just
Yeah.
saying, there's a lot of folks traveling in and out, so. But I'm with you, we need to, and we probably could manage a work session after every board meeting if the presentation meeting, our first meeting of the month is lighter.
Yep.
And if we could keep the agenda to, max 2 hours to give ourselves, an hour, hour and a half for a work session.
And I'm certainly willing,
Mostly need the evil eye up to help.
yeah, I'm willing to do
I've
more
already
weekends over the summer.
Scratched off every Tuesday every year, so.
I know. So we could start trying to do that. I just, attendance is gonna be tough in June, just I know.
Well, and when people are gone, I think we still move ahead and we.
Yeah, we need
fill
to
some-
keep proceeding.
that,
We'll work around it.
knowing that, and use the time that we do have wisely.
Yeah. So do we want to have a work session after the 12th meeting? We could. It didn't seem like a giant agenda. We just went through agenda setting.
Yes.
Who done? We said, yeah.
No, I'm invested. My grandma's 90th birthday.
Can't miss it.
what do we want to see?
Yeah, will we have new information by the 12th?
Besides the maps, what would you like?
I think the maps would be fantastic. If we could have
I
it by
haven't
the
got an
12th,
answer
that would
from
be
Adam
lovely.
yet, so I will, as soon as I get an answer, I'll get that out to you, all as a board, so I'll get that sent out as
I
quick as
think
possible.
the very brief critique of the PowerPoint is something to take a look at, too, some of that language, and
Yeah,
then to kind of bring it around from,
Agreed.
Sarah's last comment of, poverty's going up, and it's kind of this gloom and doom. If you look at it from that side, I think if that's the number we're going to look at, it is going to be very difficult. We are going to perpetuate this, there's nothing we can do about poverty, so why do anything? I think it is go back to what are the positives, and say diversity in schools is a good thing. And look at that presentation from that angle. I think in conjunction, I think Lori brought up, we need to do both things, right? And get that communication out there as to why we're doing it at the same time looking at our boundaries or we're not gonna get one of them done, so.
And if we want, I would hope that we would engage with some groups that have not been part of this process very robustly in the past, but that's going to involve us going to them in some cases. And you know, like Forest View neighborhood, we can go to them. I've been told that we have a meeting in Parkview, and that they would probably like to be part of that. And there's other places like that, Pheasant Ridge, you know, we can go to their neighborhood center. If we want them involved, I think that it's fair that we can go to them and not expect, because there's all kinds of things that go with us having a meeting in a school, and, you know, we get a lot of the same people. Yeah, right.
No, we want to get out. Absolutely, yeah.
But to that point, it just has to be structured process. I mean, that's the process around it. Because, you know, goes back to my comment before, you don't want to go out and tell people that, you know, this is important, it's in, and you don't, because it's sort of take their feedback. And I'm not saying you don't do that, I'm just saying this is about trust, and that, you know, when you have a big kind of thing about it, you gotta make sure that you're doing it in a way that is trustworthy. Makes sense. Not to say that you're not trustworthy.
No.
It's late.
We're
Sorry.
already-
You get what I'm
I think we want to
Yeah.
go listen to understand,
Yeah.
and not just go in with an agenda and say, well, we heard you, and then go do whatever.
But I mean, we've gotten emails and I've gotten individual messages from people who have basically voiced that they went through a process and created these boundaries, and lots of people took a lot of time and came up with something, and now we're chucking that aside, right? And so it's already happening that there was a process, now we're changing the process, so it's difficult at the very least. And so I think we have talked to, you know, in regards to the playground process and everything else, like honoring the process, we have to at least acknowledge that there was a process and maybe look for, here's how we can improve upon it, not here's how we're going to disregard it or change it or ignore everybody's input, but here's how we can take what's been done and make it better.
And you did, I mean, there's a lot that you'll stick to from that process too, like clean feeders, I'm assuming, or are you reevaluating the feeder system? Well, okay.
You don't know what we're, yeah.
Get the
We
hook,
haven't
but,
discussed it.
Yeah.
okay. I mean, you know, I'm saying like there was a lot of value clarification and decision making that came out of that process beyond just, you know, this line goes here to separate these schools, that you're not checking necessarily.
But we need to expand it, because that did not include a lot of people in our community. At some point, I don't remember what it was, but somebody figured out the average price, home price for the neighborhoods that participated in that process, and they were not affordable. I mean, it wasn't, you know, renters that were participating. I'm making very blanket judgments, or statements, but it was not inclusive of everyone in the community.
And it was a previous board that established the goals that we're heading toward, you know, as far as getting our schools within closer. And so I feel we're carrying that on by, by trying to get closer to those goals.
There's the wrench too of F&P, and I mean not wrench, but another factor, meaning we are doing a lot of building, extending. We've already talked about maybe start the next F&P planning process. We talked about it with pre-K stuff in the last committee. It's just another factor out there that's potentially a good tool for us to use if we've got some of these I don't know, goals in mind. How do we leverage the F&P to help us get there?
And what's the next stage look like?
Yeah. Okay, so we're going to have a work session at the 12th. I want to see in that session the maps that you're asking Adam to put together, and you'll let us know if we're able to do that. I don't, does the team want to meet on the 12th if we don't have those maps to look at? Or do we wait till the next June meeting?
I think the maps are important because we're just gonna keep talking in
The
circles
same
until we
Yeah, I
get
agree.
there.
So you'll let us know.
And what are we seeing in the maps?
I'm just gonna try to see if we can recreate those maps we did in 13, where we send all the students to their closest home school, and then give you what those demographics look like. So at least we get an idea, especially with, in some areas, like, think Garner Penn, where we've got such a huge overlap with it. So if we map them to their closest home school, and what do the demographics look like for those areas where there's overlap?
And the next little piece of data that would go in that is then where there is overlap and you change someone not to exactly the closest school, but to the more demographically favorable school, because
Right.
they're still within 2 miles.
Exactly.
Keeping in mind, we probably don't want to split kids in the middle of a block or.
Right. Then if you've got that idea, then you can start looking at it and saying, okay, moving the line this way or this way, that way or that way, what does that do to the capacity of the school, the demographics of the school?
All right. Sarah, thank you so much for your contributions tonight. They were really, really, really helpful. The context really was good.
Thanks for the invitation to join you. And, you know, among the Affordable Housing Coalition members, there's not agreement about what you all should do, right? But we do agree that it's an important conversation to have, that it's deeply connected to our housing advocacy, and that we want to support a process that thinks about the relationship between schools and neighborhoods, and that will help to provide more stable housing. So let us know if there are other kinds of education information sharing we can do to that end.
Okay,
Thank you.
I think we have a motion to adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.